Evening Standard, Mr. Anjem Choudary wants to fight for an Islamic State with Sharia law in Britain. He wants the flag of Allah over Downing Street. Ladies and gentlemen, this would mean the end of our precious liberties, even though with Gordon Brown in office, one might not easily see the difference today. Sharia. Sharia means the end of our hard-won freedom. For Sharia law denies the equality of men and women, of Muslims and non-Muslims. It does not allow Muslims to leave Islam. Renegades, apostates must be killed according to Islam, as you know. Sharia advocates slavery and does not recognize democracy. As a matter of fact, Sharia is exactly the opposite of democracy. And unfortunately, among European Muslims, the support for this creeping Sharia law is substantial. Last year, the British Centre for Social Cohesion released a survey held under British Muslim students. And some of the outcomes were horrifying. 32% of the British Muslim students said that killing in the name of Islam is justified. And 40% of them said that they supported the introduction of Sharia law in Britain. But be aware, also in the United States of America, also in your country, there is a process of Islamization. There are numerous examples. For instance, Muslim cab drivers who refuse to transport passengers possessing alcohol or guide dogs. Muslim students demanding separate housing on campus, separate hours for Muslim women in gyms and swimming pools, and many US journalists that I've met myself who told me that they self-censor themselves, being afraid of being sued and taken to court. Fortunately, some politicians are not giving in. Your former Republican US Congressman Tom Tancredo is one of those heroes. Last year, he introduced his Counter-Sharia Jihad Prevention Act, and that bill would bar the entry of people in the United States who advocate Sharia law. And this, ladies and gentlemen, this is exactly what the West needs. Brave leaders who have the courage to do something against the growing Islamization. Ladies and gentlemen, we really do have to stop the Islamization of the West. Because if we don't, we will roll back centuries. It will mean the end of our civilization. If we don't act now, we betray our Western values. We will lose our culture. We will lose our democracy. And we will lose the dearest of our many liberties, which is the right to speak our mind. And the biggest disease in political Europe today is the disease that is called cultural relativism. The misconception that cultures are equal. Well, let me tell you, they are not. Our culture, our Western culture, based on Judaism, on Christianity, and on humanism, is far better than the Islamic. And that's why we should support, all of us, the only democracy in the Middle East, which is called the State of Israel. The State of Israel. Israel is one of us. As a matter of fact, the fight, the jihad against Israel is not a fight against Israel. It's a fight against us all. It's not, ladies and gentlemen, it's not a territorial conflict. It's jihad. It's jihad against the West. Territorial concessions will have no effect. The jihad will not stop, it will only begin. As I stated in the beginning of my lecture, free speech already is no longer a given in Europe. Last February, I tried to visit Britain, a fellow European country. I was invited to give a speech in the House of Lords by my colleague Lord Malcolm Pearson. However, upon arrival at Heathrow Airport, I was refused entry in the United Kingdom. They took me for a couple of hours to a detention center and then sent me back on a plane to the Netherlands. And I would have loved so much to be able to remind the audience in the United Kingdom of a great man who once spoke in the House of Commons. And in 1982, President Ronald Reagan, the former government of this great state, California, gave a speech in the House of Commons that very few Europeans appreciated. President Reagan called upon the West to reject communism and to defend freedom. And he introduced a new phrase, evil empire. And Reagan's speech at that time stands out as a clarion call to preserve our liberties. Let me quote what President Reagan said. He said that if history teaches anything, it teaches self-delusion in the face of unpleasant facts is folly. And what President Reagan, of course, meant is that you cannot run away from history. You cannot escape the dangers of an ideology that is out to destroy you. Denial is no option. And communism of the 80s is Islam of today. Ladies and gentlemen, just like the British ban, the decision of the Amsterdam Court of Appeal to prosecute me for fitna and my views on Islam is a major blow dealt to freedom of speech in Europe. There are full-fledged attacks on the freedom of speech in order to appease Muslims. And whether or not I will end up in jail is not the most important issue. I gave up my freedom more than 4 years ago. Indeed, I am under full-time police protection because of those death threats and fatwas from Muslims and terroristic groups like Al-Qaeda. I lived in many safe houses, in army barracks, even in prison cells, but it's not about me. It's not about Geert Wilders. The real question is, will free speech be put behind bars? And we have to defend the freedom of speech. And that's why I propose the withdrawal of all hate speech legislation in Europe. I propose the European First Amendment. In Europe, we should defend freedom of speech like you Americans do. Recently, I showed fitna in the heart of your great democracy, in the US Senate at the invitation of Senator Kyle, while at the same time the European Parliament banned my film twice, both in Strasbourg and in Brussels. Europe should take America as a model. In Europe, freedom of speech should be extended, not restricted. And besides a European First Amendment, I propose a boycott of the UN Human Rights Council. And I propose the boycott of this terrible council, not just because the worst violators of human rights are members of this council, like Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, but recently this terrifying council adopted a resolution that attempts to kill free speech and the concept of human rights. The resolution on combating defamation of religions does not protect individuals, but shields Islam for criticism. The approved UN resolution calls upon member states to provide legal protection against defamation of religions and incitement to religious hatred. What you should read is no more criticism on Islam. This was supported by the OIC, by the Organization of the Islamic Conference, and it's a next step to limit of free speech and the appeasement of Muslims. The United Nations, that world organization, should be ashamed of itself. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, it's a few minutes to 12. In 2009 Europe, Islam is calling for our destruction and free speech is already on trial. If we go on like this, we are heading for the end of our European civilization. But fortunately, many people think like you and me about freedom